it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Not a thrifting video today, but instead I'm going to be talking about the books I read in March. I went on holiday for a few weeks in March, and for travelling I tend to take my Kindle with me rather than a physical book, just because it's, takes up less space and it weighs less. And I downloaded a book to read on my travels, but I had a bit of a gap between the last book I read in February and actually going on holiday, so I had a little bit of time to read a short book, and I picked up Spring Break by Barbara Steiner. This is part of the Point Horror series of books that was very popular in the 90s, and I was totally obsessed with these when I was like 12 years old. I had tons of them, and yeah, they were just everything. This wasn't actually one that I read back in the day, but it was one that I found in a charity shop back in London probably a couple of years ago, and so just for funsies I picked it up. And anyway, just because recently I was looking for something short to read before I went on holiday and started the Kindle book I had, I figured this would fit in nicely. And it's not very good, I'll be honest. I enjoyed it for the nostalgia, but this I don't think was one of the best ones in the series. I have read a couple of them in recent years, and there's a couple that I read that are actually pretty good, but this isn't one of them. It's basically about a group of friends who rent a creepy house by the sea for spring break, and weird stuff starts happening, and it's just all very silly, and yeah, it just wasn't the best story really. Anyway, it was a fun read and a quick read as well because it's so short, and I mean these covers were just, I was obsessed with these things. Still am, actually, I'm not gonna lie. And anyway, so I only gave this like 2 stars out of 5 just because it was just very silly. So I downloaded Intensity by Koontz onto my Kindle before going on holiday, and I really liked it. I haven't read any Koontz in years, so I'm not overly familiar with a lot of his stuff, but obviously I know he is a very popular author and has written a ton of books. Anyway, I heard that Intensity was supposed to be really good, and I got it on Amazon for only 99p, so I thought that was a good bargain. So this follows the main character China, who's a 20-something young lady studying psychology, and she finds herself in a situation with a serial killer, and so it's a bit of a cat and mouse type story. It is very gripping for the most part. I did find a couple of spots dragged a little bit, but for the most part it was pretty intriguing, and it was definitely a page turner, so it was definitely a good one to read while I was travelling and just needed something, to occupy my mind during the many hours of flights and trains and buses and whatnot. Some parts of the story I wasn't as keen on, but overall it was really well written and really enjoyable to read. I mean, it's a thriller, so it's a definite page turner. If that's what you're looking for, I would definitely recommend it. And overall I gave it 4 stars out of 5, so yeah, it was a good one. Next up was a book I picked up in a charity shop back in the UK, which is where I went on a holiday, and it was Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. And I got this from a charity shop for, I think it was like £1.50 or something, and I had heard of it. I've definitely seen the cover online, but I didn't really know too much about it. I just knew that it was a thriller of some sort. It's about another 20-something young lady. This one is living in New York, and she works for a women's fashion magazine. She is living the dream. She's well paid, she's got a great job, she's got a great fiance, she's preparing for her wedding and the married life that they're going to be leading together, and she seems like she has it all going for her. Throughout the book though, it flips back to her teenage years at school and an incident that happened to her during that time. So there's a lot of back and forth between these two different time periods throughout the book. And to start off with, the main character, Arnie, is not a likeable character, and at times though I wasn't sure whether it was the character I didn't like or the author. I don't know if anyone else has read this and felt the same way. I did like a lot of the writing, but then other times I just found it a bit cringeworthy. There were a few parts, whether it was just a line here and there or whether it was at a full on scene or part of the book, that I just felt had been put in for the shock value and to come across as edgy, and it actually just had the opposite effect for me. I found that it was just trying too hard. Saying that, there was a lot of the book that I did like. I actually did like a lot of the flashback stuff when she was a teenager, and it definitely made me reminisce about my teenage years at school and just generally how horrible teenage girls can be. So I had a lot of weirdly nostalgic moments throughout this book, and I thought those parts were really well told for the most part. So it's definitely an intriguing story, and I was intrigued enough, you know, to keep reading it and find out exactly what had happened in her teenage years and how that affected her and made her who she is today. So overall, there were some parts that I did like, some parts I didn't, and I ended up giving it a 3 stars rating out of 5. Next up, I read The Devil of Nanking by Hayder, and this was another one that I've seen online that seemed really interesting to me. It's another thriller. Without planning to, I ended up going with a lot of thrillers this month. Anyway, so I picked up The Devil of Nanking from Barter Books, which, if you haven't heard of it, is one of the biggest secondhand bookshops in the UK, I believe. And I have been there before years ago, and during this trip back to the UK recently, I travelled around quite a bit, and Northumberland was one of the areas that I spent a bit of time. So we were near to Alnwick, which is where Barter Books is, and of course we had to go. So yeah, it's really awesome. I did shoot some footage while I was there to share with you, in case you've never heard of it. So if you're ever in the UK and you're anywhere near Alnwick in Northumberland, I would highly recommend checking it out. Anyway, so The Devil of Nanking by Hayder was, I would say, my favourite book so far that I've read this year. It tells the story of a young woman, I think she's another 20-something young lady, and her name is Gray. She's from England, and she travels to Japan on the hunt for a video depicting something that happened during the Nanking massacre during the 1930s. And she is adamant that this film exists, yet over time it's been covered up, and so there's no record of it. And she travels to Japan determined to find it, but she's constantly met with obstacles and denials of its existence. This was a really awesome thriller, and it was just such an intriguing story, and I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about the history of the Nanking massacre, and I just thought that was fascinating in itself, and it's something that I would really like to read more about. But anyway, it uses that as a backdrop for Gray's story, and she's going on this quest basically to find this film and basically prove that she didn't make it up, because over the years everyone has thought she was just making this up, and she's kind of, you know, driven herself crazy a bit over it. And like Arnie in The Luckiest Girl Alive, Gray isn't an overly likeable character, but I still found her really interesting, and I really enjoyed reading about her. I definitely found her a lot more interesting and intriguing than Arnie. Anyway, the story was just super intriguing. It had so many elements going on. It had, you know, the thriller aspect. It was definitely a page turner, but then it also had this much more emotional aspect to it that I really kind of found more of a connection with, and I found that really, you know, immersed the reader in it much more, and I had much more of a connection to the story and the characters than in maybe lots of other thrillers that are just there for kind of being gripping page turners than anything else. So anyway, I thought this one had a lot going for it, and I gave it 4 stars out of 5, but in hindsight I think it's a 4.5 star for sure. It was just kind of shy of being a 5-star read really. I just found it really intriguing and interesting, and it's the first book by Hayder that I've read, so I would definitely be keen on checking more stuff out. And as a side note, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but let's face it, we all do. I do anyway. And the UK cover of this is just really terrible. I'm just gonna say it. If I hadn't already heard about this book and seen, you know, good ratings of it, there is probably no way I would have ever picked this book up. I would just have walked by. It looks completely uninteresting. It doesn't do itself any favours whatsoever. And the US cover is much more interesting. It's obviously very eye-catching. Anyway, I guess that's the beauty of the internet and of BookTube, that people can share their recommendations, and so yeah, I'm glad that I found this one and I really enjoyed it. It was one that stayed with me, and I still think about it a month later, so yeah. Okay, and the last book I read in March was Rubbernecker. Rubbernecker by Belinda Bauer. And this I also got from a charity shop. It was just £1, and I ended up not finishing this by the time I came back home, so I brought it home with me and ended up reading it on the journey back on the plane. So that's why I ended up with this one. I ended up leaving the other ones behind. I gave one of them to my sister. I have read another one of hers, and it was called Blacklands, which was pretty good. It was another, you know, kind of murder, crime, thriller type affair, and this one I think I did like more than that one. This one I ended up giving 4 stars out of 5. So it's been a pretty good month actually. And anyway, this one, I'll read the blurb. It says, "Life is strange for Patrick Fort. Being a medical student with Asperger's syndrome doesn't come without its challenges. And that's before he is faced with solving a possible murder." So yeah, I really like this one. The story follows the main character Patrick, who is, I think, in his teenage years or early 20s, I can't quite remember, and he is starting an anatomy class at university. So it follows that he stumbles upon what he thinks is a murder, and throughout the book it also flits between several different characters, all of whom have kind of different levels of involvement. And yeah, it was really well written. I really did enjoy it, and I liked how the storylines all came together. I will say that some of it was a bit obvious, and I'm not sure if there was meant to be a twist, but it wasn't for me, so I'm not quite sure whether it was meant to be more of a surprise at the end as to how things turned out or not, because it wasn't so much for me. But it was still really enjoyable to read and an intriguing storyline. So yeah, this was another really good thriller that I read in March, and yeah, I would be interested to read more of her stuff. So that was everything I read in March. It was a pretty good reading month for me. It was nice to be able to read more than usual with being on holiday and doing a lot of travelling around. Have you read any of these books? If so, let me know what you thought, or let me know what you're reading at the moment. I did film a little bit of Barter Books while I was there, and so I will share that with you now. If you're interested, please keep watching. so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!